Hey Fight fans, I'm Sarah Davis and you're watching Fight News Now Extra. Don't miss an update straight from Montreal as John Pollock talks with GSP and kickboxing's bad boy is out of jail. John Ramdeen and Robin Black will also join us, so stay tuned. The UFC just held a press conference in Montreal for UFC 158 St. Pierre versus Diaz. John Pollock got a chance to catch up with the man of the hour, and here's what he had to say.
We're here with UFC welterweight champion George St. Pierre getting set for UFC 158. It's coming up March the 16th at the Bell Center. And George, obviously very quick here in between fights for yourself. How much time did you take off for yourself after the Carlos Condit fight and a very tough 5-round fight?
Yeah, very tough 5-round. It was the Saturday and the Wednesday I was running track. I like to keep myself in shape. It allowed me to recuperate faster.
And as soon as that fight was over, was that the mindset of you want to get back into the octagon as soon as possible, or was this a situation where this opportunity presented itself to come back so soon?
Yeah, it's an opportunity, and also I know we had a lot of contender. I've been out for a long time, and I love my job. I wanted to do it fast.
Earlier at the press conference, I mean, Nick Diaz very complimentary towards yourself. Were you a little almost surprised by the Nick Diaz demeanor? And it seems that this is going to be a very respectful build-up to March the 16th.
No, I knew it could have been like this. No, I'm not surprised. I'm not disappointed. I go with the flow.
Last year at UFC 143, when Condit fought Nick Diaz, who did you feel won that fight?
I think Condit won the fight.
Did you look at that tape quite a lot in preparation for the Condit fight?
No.
And finally, just with Nick Diaz, how important do you think wrestling is going to be when it comes to this fight and some of the difficulties that Nick Diaz presents? Because obviously on paper, very intriguing fight here.
He's very well-rounded. He's good in every aspect of the fight, and I'm ready for that. I'm gonna give it all.
We look forward to it. March the 16th. Tickets are on sale now for UFC 158. George St. Pierre, Nick Diaz. All the best leading up to March 16th. Thank you very much, George.
And kickboxing's bad boy, Badr Hari, has been temporarily released from jail while he awaits his trial to start. Charges against the heavyweight stem from a criminal assault at an Amsterdam nightclub last summer. Those are the top headlines from the combat sports world. Let's take it over to John Ramdeen and Robin Black. And guys, GSP not saying too much ahead of this fight.
Yeah, there's a shock. George St. Pierre saying very little about the fight, about the landscape of the division, blah, blah, blah. This is what we've come to expect from George St. Pierre, and it is a very good thing that Nick Diaz is his dance partner because he's going to create a lot of interest. He talks a lot, and first things first, I think it was you and Mr. Pollock who said Nick Diaz is not going to show up to the press conference or the fight. This is not going to happen. You're wrong.
Hey, man, they told him there'd be weed at the press conference, and so he's like, there's going to be weed? I will totally be there. And then he sat there in front of everybody and kind of just, went through the motions, which, again, like, you've got George St. Pierre, one of the greatest fighters ever in history, and you got Nick Diaz, one of the most interesting guys ever, and both of them are just kind of towing the party line. If they're not sitting in front of each other, Diaz will say all kinds of bad things about George, but they're in front. Neither guy said a lot.
And I think that's what's going to happen moving forward. Of course, we know it's going to get the primetime treatment, so you have to imagine Nick Diaz is going to do his best to say every bad thing humanly possible about the 170-pound champion. And I think he's going to create a lot of interest. And I think George is going to create a lot of interest because right now he says that Nick Diaz is the #1 contender. A lot of people thought it was Johnny Hendricks, but George St. Pierre himself said that he felt that Johnny Hendricks lost that fight with Josh Koscheck. I have to agree with him. And I think that Nick Diaz, being a champion from Strikeforce, and I know that fight with Carlos Condit was very, very close, but I think Nick Diaz is the true #1 contender at 170 pounds right now, or at least the most interesting because there are no official rankings.
Well, yeah, I think the last thing you said was probably the most important. Really, there's no such thing as a #1 contender. There's no such thing as rankings, really. What matters is what's going to sell fights. And, I mean, everybody says that out in the open. I don't think I'm reinventing the wheel here. Nick Diaz will sell this fight. He's interesting. He's odd. He's dangerous. He's very, very scrappy. He comes from a different background. He's the real deal. And George is a robot. And when you take a robot and he fights a monster, I think we all want to see that.
I think one of the angles that they're going to look at when talking about this fight and breaking it down is, of course, we know that GSP is the fitness machine. He can go for days, but he's facing a guy with probably a bigger and deeper gas tank in Diaz. What is the strategy for each guy? Is it simple as George uses his wrestling, and Nick Diaz will be put on his back, and he'll try to look to sweep or submit from that position?
I think the key, if you're George and his people, is you make it as complex as possible. The simple thinking is, well, I'm in great shape, but this guy does triathlons. I'm a better wrestler, and he's maybe dangerous on the feet. But you make it extremely complicated. You take advantage of what potentially is Nick Diaz's weakness, which is maybe his fight IQ. And right now, Nick Diaz, in all these interviews, and the interview today was saying, you know, I brought in these wrestlers, I prepared for his wrestling, I used to prepare for Matt Hughes, who's the same kind of fighter, and you make the GSP that comes in there not that. You don't bring him in there with where Diaz can figure out how to train for him. You bring in a different kind of George, and that's something they can do in the lab with his conditioning, with his explosiveness, with his strategy. He's a very smart fighter surrounded by very smart people, so you don't give Nick Diaz what he's expecting.
I like that this is the main event, but I think the entire card, it should be highlighted because it's not just about the welterweight championship, it's about the other 170-pound fighters as well. Carlos Condit rematching Rory MacDonald, and of course Johnny Hendricks taking on Jake Ellenberger in what could be a sleeper fight. So I think overall this fight is interesting for the entire 170-pound class.
Yes, and I think going forward, the UFC, we've seen them really start to figure out how to use FX Fuel and Fox, and to be able to lay out a division and make that much sense of it in one night is very, very cool.
Sarah, after this card, we'll know where everybody stands in the welterweight division.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting after UFC 158. Thanks, guys. Stay right here on Fight News Now Extra. Preview for Bellator 86 is next, along with a look at ONE FC Return of the Warriors.